birth. We all know how it goes. We know that he grew up working with his father. He worked as a laborer. He worked with his hands. That means he was prone to scrapes, bruises, cuts, sweat, blood, all of it. And before starting his ministry, he for 30 years he did not start his ministry until he was all grown up. He had to go through the process of growing up, just like we do, right? And I think that's the reason why Christ is able to connect with us. But why aren't we able to connect with Christ? If we take a deeper look, I think we can relate to Christ. I think we can see him as us, as one of us. In the gospel that we had just read today, the Gospel of Luke, Satan tries to tempt Jesus 3 times. The first time he says, turn these stones into bread. The second time he says, I will give you all the kingdoms of the world, their authority and everything, if you worship me. And the third time he says, here's the high point of the temple, jump off of it just to see if God's there for you. And if you think about it, we have been tempted with all these 3 things, and we go through temptation as we're kids and as we're adults. And we go through it without realizing it. If we go back and look at the first temptation, why is Satan saying, turn these breads into stone? Satan is telling Jesus, in other words, he's saying, you have fleshly desires, you've been out in the wilderness, this is your weakest point, and you don't know if you're going to survive or not, because, like I mentioned, Jesus is still human at that point, right? He chose not to use his godly powers, and he chose to go through life as we do. So if we were in his place, we would also be hungry, and we would be in the wilderness, in the sun, in the cold, and on the brink of death because we haven't eaten for 40 days. And if Satan comes to us and he tempts us, turn these stones into bread, he's basically saying that take a shortcut. Why don't you take a shortcut? Yeah, sure, you believe in God and whatever, that's good and all, but take a shortcut. Why don't you? I know you're hungry, you want to eat, take a shortcut. And if you think about it, even as kids, I remember back in my high school, a lot of the friends I grew up were very poor. They had family issues, they had family problems, they did not have money, and instead of praying to God and trusting his process and trusting that he will provide for his people, what they used to do was steal, take drugs, sell drugs. Actually, that was a big thing. And basically they were giving in to their temptations. They were taking the shortcut. They were taking the easy way out. They know they were hungry and they wanted to feed themselves, and they had no money. So what do? They steal. They take drugs. They sell drugs. Actually, they sell dope, and that's one of the reasons Satan tempts us. He doesn't say turn these stones into bread, but he uses the same temptation to this day on us. And Jesus went through the same thing. We go through the same thing. And if, as we started out by the analogy with Peter Parker, he also goes through the same thing. He also tries to fulfill his fleshly desires. When Uncle Ben dies, everyone knows, whoever watched Spider-Man, that he wanted to kill the person who murdered his uncle, right? That's our normal response. If someone kills my uncle or someone kills my father or my mother or anyone, I would have rage inside me. I would have desires of my body to emotionally, I would be enraged, and I would want to hurt the person that hurt a loved one, right? So what does he do then? Everyone who watched the first Sam Raimi movie knows that he does not give in to his desires. And we all remember this clearly because we see how incredible Peter Parker is at doing what's always right. He always aims to do what's right. And now, if we take a look, Jesus also did the same thing. He also tried to do what's right and did not succumb to his fleshly desires of taking the shortcut or taking the easy way out. Right? A second time Satan tempts Jesus, he says, worship me and I will give you all the kingdoms of the world. So here Satan is saying that Yeah, sure, you have a mission. You want to achieve victory. You want to take victory over all the kingdoms, but are you sure you're going to be able to do that? Because Jesus was on the brink of like almost death. He didn't eat. He was at his weakest point, and Satan chose this opportunity to tempt him at that particular moment because he knew that this would be his weakest point. And he's saying that, look, you don't know if your mission is going to be successful. You don't know if you're going to conquer all the kingdoms of the world. You don't know that because you chose to become human. As a human, you cannot predict the future. You cannot know for certain, right? So Satan is saying, you don't know for sure, but if you worship me, I will make sure that that happens. And he does this, and what is Jesus' response? Jesus says that you shall only worship the Lord your God. And what he's saying here is that if we think about it, if you do bad deeds, if you do bad things, and you're inherently worshiping the devil because you're doing his works. Similarly, if we do God's works, we're worshiping God, right? If we let all the attributes of God within us, right, love, compassion, all these godly attributes, we are necessarily letting him in and doing his work through us. So ultimately, we are, and even in the Bible it says we are temples of God. Jesus came here to cleanse all of us so he can build temples within us, right? So when we do God's work, we inherently worship God. So here Satan was saying, do bad and worship me. So if we think about in our lives, especially the youth I'm talking to, we will one day graduate from colleges, universities, and we will get jobs one day. We will go into careers. And one thing about careers is that you always aim to go higher. You always want to get a promotion and get a pay raise. That's our ambition. That's our goal. That's our mission, so to speak, right? And a lot of times we're not the only one competing for a specific position. We will have competition. We will have another person that is also qualified for the position. And what we do is we pray to God. We pray that, please, Father, let it be us, or let it be me in that position. Let me have that promotion. I want to have that promotion. And sometimes we don't hear directly from God, and we wonder that is he even listening? Like I'm about to get that promotion, my boss is about to announce a promotion, and God has not given me reassurance that I will get it. So if we were to give in to our temptations and worship the devil, what we would have done, we would try to take that person out of our way, try to shot that person's credibility, so that person is no longer qualified for that position. And it might seem very evil, but that kind of thing still happens in a lot of big companies, and it's very, very common to try to compete and win unjustly, right? So when we do that and when we give in to those temptations, we are inherently worshiping the devil, and worshiping the devil in exchange for power, because that's what Satan said. He said, "Worship me in exchange for power." Right? There's a power transfer. And that's what Satan does to us even to this day. He tempts us exactly the same way he tempted Jesus, but Jesus did not succumb to his temptations. Right? Jesus, he said, you shall only worship the Lord your God, meaning you shall only do his works and only trust in him. Right? And if we were not to do the devil's work, we would trust in God's process and believe that if that position is for you, God will give it to you. He will make sure that in your mission to success, in your mission to victory, you will be the one victorious. Right? And lastly, the third time the devil tempts Jesus, he says, he says, go to the highest point. Well, he brings him to the highest point of the temple and tells him to jump off a cliff, to jump off the highest point and to see if God's really there for him. As in, because it is written that God will send his angels to lift you up so that your foot will not touch the stone. So, in other words, he's saying that, you know what, just try. Just try jumping off and see if God's really there for you. You think he's there for you, but in reality, he's not. Just try. Just listen to me. Just try. That's what he's saying inherently. And if we think about it, that's what the devil does to us at all times. Every time we want to pray, we want to get closer to God, we want to trust God's process. What ends up happening most of the time? Most of the time, we always have this voice saying, like, there's no response today. Maybe God is not listening. Maybe my prayers aren't loud enough. Maybe should I continue praying, or should I do this on my own? Maybe God wants me to do something on my own. Maybe that's his way. We don't know, and we get doubts, right? That was Satan's purpose. He wanted to create doubt even in the mind of Jesus Christ, and he does the same thing with us. He tries to create reasonable doubt in our minds and hearts so that we start becoming away from God. We start disconnecting from God and stop having his attributes within us, and inherently do the devil's work, and by consequence, worshiping the devil. That's what he wants, right? So that's what he does. That's what he constantly aims to do. If we think about Peter Parker again, he goes through the same thing too, right? He does not know. He's in a state of uncertainty at all times. He tries to do good. Every time he tries to do good, he wears the mask, he fights as Spider-Man. But what ends up happening? He creates roadblocks for Peter Parker. He creates roadblocks every time he has a date with Mary Jane, or he has a date with Felicia Hardy in the animated series Spider-Man. He can never make it to his date because there's always something going on with Spider-Man. Spider-Man has to take over and fight crime. But each time he does it, he does not know if he's going to have a second shot or not. He's always in the state of uncertainty. He's always tempted to ignore Spider-Man and not do what's right and maybe make it to his date, right? And Jesus does the same thing too. At this point, he is suffering. He is in the wilderness, and he's also tempted by devil to think that, to create doubt in himself that maybe God is not there. Let me rephrase it. At that point, Jesus is also uncertain. Just like Peter Parker is uncertain, just like we are uncertain. We are in the state of uncertainty because we do not know what is going to happen, right? And what did Jesus end up doing? He says, "You shall not test the Lord your God." That means he stayed firm and did not succumb to that temptation. So does Peter Parker. He does not succumb to the temptation of not doing what's right. And if we look up at Peter Parker by always doing what's right, now we have Jesus Christ as our example, a real life example, that he also chose to do what's right, no matter how much he was tempted. He was tempted, he was doubted, he was put into a state where Satan was saying, you know what, try. You don't know. God is not there for you. I want you to doubt. But Jesus did not doubt at all, right? I will not give a conclusion because for every person, the way every one of us relates with Peter Parker is always different. So the way each one of us relates with Jesus Christ is also very different. So therefore, the conclusion for everyone is different. But I will leave you with this though, especially when we start Lent season and we aim to be closer to God. We know that this is the prime time, the very prime time where Satan will try to tempt each one of us. He will try to tempt us to move away from God. He will create hurdles, he would create obstacles, and then come to us and say that, are you sure God is there for you? Like, are you sure? Are you 100% sure, or is there a doubt? Right? He will tempt us to succumb to our fleshly desires. He will tempt us to pursue power in the wrong ways. right? Especially when we aim to do God's work, He will not let that happen. He will make sure that we do not do God's work and worship Him. Because once we worship God, we will do what is right. We will always do what is right, and we will always do God's work. So let me leave you with this. If we can relate to a fictional character designed by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and we're able to relate to him, I hope that through my preaching and what God is telling you is that despite following a fictional character, we should look, as Christians, we should look at a real life superhero that we have, that actually lived, that also actually achieved victory on the cross by going to the cross, conquering death and evil, and attaining all the kingdoms of the world. Right? Through Christ, the whole world is saved. So he actually fulfilled his mission. Whereas the fictional character, Peter Parker, he's still in uncertainty. He does not know what's going to happen next. He does not know if he will ultimately achieve victory. He's still living through life. He still has his struggles. Everything is going as it is, and he's uncertain. Therefore, if we idolize Peter Parker, we're also uncertain because we don't know what's going to happen. But if we aim to take Christ as our superhero and get inspiration from Christ and let that empower us, that Christ was like us and Christ was tempted exactly like we are tempted today, but he overcame those temptations, and we should also be able to overcome those temptations and attain victory like Christ did. I think it's time we put aside Spider-Man and make way for Jesus, Jesus Christ, and take him as our superhero. Thank you so much.
It was supposed to be a solo performance, but now it's becoming a sing-along. So please feel free to sing with the children.
shout, shout, shout. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna shout. Praise the Lord. When those gates are open wide, I'm gonna sit by Jesus' side. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna shout. Praise the Lord. I'm gonna sing, sing, sing. I'm gonna shout, shout, shout. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna shout. Praise the Lord. When those gates are open wide, I'm gonna sit by Jesus' side. I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna shout. Praise the Lord. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under the bushel. I'm gonna let it shine. Hide it under the bushel. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. This is the light of mine. I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it up. I'm gonna let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it up. I'm gonna let it shine. Don't let Satan blow it up. I'm gonna let it shine.